Hi everyone, I'm Dan Jones, SVP of Products at Skytap. I want to thank you for tuning in today. I hope everyone is staying safe and that we can return to in-person events next year. Today I'm going to share with you what Skytap is doing with Microsoft to enable running of IBM Power workloads in Azure. I'm going to turn off my video for the presentation so the content is maximized for your screen. So here we go. All right, so let's get rolling. So you can run Power on Microsoft Azure. We'll take a look at the solution offering, key capabilities and use cases, then jump into network and a bit of the technical architecture, walk through a demo, and then talk about where the service is available. Skytap is designed to natively run IBM Power applications in Azure. And I'll get into the architecture in a few slides, but the key word here is natively. We're not doing emulation whatsoever. This allows us to support all three OSs on Power, AIX, IBM I, and Linux. And we also support traditional x86 applications running on Windows or Linux. These are apps that, for whatever reason, cannot run natively on Azure VMs without some level of refactoring. We also see use cases where an x86 app needs to be deployed alongside the app components running on Power. Typically, this is a requirement around very low latency. And the point of all this is to enable businesses to accelerate their migration to Azure and spend more time on innovation than on refactoring or replatforming their applications. On the right-hand side, you see a screenshot of our UI. We'll see more of this in the demo. In terms of key capabilities, top of the list is compatibility. And we're focused on eliminating the need for any part of the Power workload to be changed when moving from on-prem into Azure. Given the robustness of the platform, this isn't always easy. And while I'll say our team has done an excellent job to date of removing barriers, there's still more work for us to do. Self-service has always been a hallmark of our design principles. Prior to Skytap, I worked in IT at a large retailer. And every time my team needed a VM or a config change to a VM, we had to open a support ticket and wait for the operations team to get it into their queue, get it prioritized, and act on the ticket. Also, across all of IT and app dev, we maintained numerous static integration environments, and these were always in different states of, I'll call it, correctness. All this was total nonsense and a waste of resources. Skytap allows controlled delegation of action. So as an admin, you can effectively sandbox individuals and teams, enabling them to manage within their quota but stay focused on productive activities, not waiting for tickets to be prioritized and acted upon. It also ensures that you can control spend, so individual users can't rack up large monthly bills. With extensibility, Skytap can be integrated into existing tool chains, such as Terraform. We happen to have a Terraform provider, but through our RESTful APIs, you can integrate into other aspects of your tool chain. And automation is such a key element of CI/CD that integration is really critical. In addition, since we're running in Azure, you have low latency access to native Azure services to extend the value of your Power workloads. And lastly, certainly not least, is agility. I mentioned before the static integration environments that we had to maintain in my previous employer. A key concept within Skytap is an environment. And you can think of this as a virtual data center that encapsulates compute, network, and storage and data. There's some cool things you can do with environments to increase the productivity of your teams, such as eliminating the need to babysit static environments and instead focusing on innovation. We'll see more of those capabilities when we get to the demo. For use cases, typical set, production, DR, dev test, virtual labs. I'd like to use some customer examples for each one of these to highlight what our customers are doing, how they're using the service to make good on each of these individual use cases. So for production, a large food processing company, think hams, bacon, hot dogs, etc. Their manufacturing control system runs on AIX. Well, they were up against a hardware refresh. They really didn't want to do the capital outlay to refresh their hardware platform. So they moved all of the AIX components into Skytap. They still have some x86 components that run on premises, and they're using VPN to connect between Skytap and on premises. And then that manages all their production manufacturing control systems. They also have, in their situation, they have some non-production environments that they use to validate changes before they deploy them to production. Those environments, they just bring up when they need it, and then they shut it down when they don't need it. Disaster recovery is a use case that we've really seen sort of take off in the last 12 months or so. To illustrate here, there's a high-end furniture and textile manufacturer on the East Coast. They run all their manufacturing systems on IBM I. They used to do daily backups and then store those off-site, and in the event of a disaster, they would bring the backups back on site and get back up and running. That's all fine as long as you don't lose your production site, which in 2012, they happened to lose their production site because of Hurricane Sandy. So they lost all power to their production site. So they brought in Maxava, which is an ISV in the IBM I space that has a disaster recovery solution, and Skytap. They brought online IBM I instances in Skytap and deployed Maxava between on-prem and Skytap to do a hot DR solution. They're currently streaming about 6 million transactions per day between on-prem and Skytap. And now if they hit an outage on their main server or their main data center, they can quickly be back up and running with zero data loss. So pretty exciting for them, a game changer for them. And they're able to do this without having to go do a big capital outlay for a second data center and a second set of hardware. They can run only what they need to run to keep DR up and running, and then in the event of a disaster, they can bring the system up to sort of full speed, if you will. In the dev and test space, I mentioned what the food processing company is doing with non-production environments. Another good example here, an ISV who provides a data operations platform to retail, consumer packaged goods, financial services, and other industries. Well, their solution only supported SUSE Linux on x86, but they were faced with a significant sales opportunity where they needed to validate their software on SUSE on Power. The customer was already running Linux on Power for various other workloads, and they wouldn't accept an x86 solution. The ISV didn't have any access to Power hardware. They didn't really know what they were going to do. Well, in walks Skytap, and within a week, their test engineers were able to stand up the Skytap environment on an IBM Power platform running SUSE Linux, deploy their software, and perform a smoke test to verify that their tool sets, such as QA automation, would work as expected. Everything worked beautifully, and they immediately moved into performing their full set of regression tests, confirming that their platform worked in the customer's environment. So it was a big win for them, and they were able to do that with no capital outlay in a very short amount of time. The last use case, virtual labs, we see two sort of sub-use cases here. One are sales demos, where at an ISV, their sales teams are doing demos of their product to their customer base or opportunities, and virtual training, where they're delivering training of their product to their customers. While we don't have a lot of Power customers that are doing this just yet, we do have a large number of x86 customers using Skytap for these two use cases. One example that comes to mind is a networking and network security software company. They were hosting 60 to 70 in-person events a year. Then the pandemic hit, which canceled all in-person events. Their competitors started offering webinars and online training. Well, with Skytap, they were able to quickly respond to what their competitors were doing by offering free virtual hands-on training events, running all those on top of Skytap. Today, they're hosting up to 150 attendees at any given time, and if they have last-minute registrations, they can easily accommodate those students. bring them online with very little effort whatsoever. So they get that elasticity and contraction as they need based on what they need to, the number of students that they need to train. Well, without Skytap, they wouldn't have been able to respond as quickly as they did to the changes in the market and the competition. Network architecture, and I'll talk a little bit about the technical architecture as well. So on the left-hand side, you have the on-premises data center. Right-hand side, you have an Azure region. Within the Azure region, you have the Azure subscription. That's the customer subscription. There they have their Azure VMs, Azure VNets, and native services like SQL Azure. On the right-hand side, you have Skytap on Azure. And the blue box in Skytap on Azure labeled Azure Dedicated, there's a Azure engineering team that is responsible for these non-standard workloads, such as Skytap, NetApp, Cray, and others. So we work closely with them. We have been over the last couple of years to deploy our exact specification for hardware into an Azure region. And so Microsoft does that deployment for us. We layer Skytap on top of that. This is what allows us to natively run Power applications in Azure. Microsoft is purchasing IBM Power hardware and deploying it on our behalf. Under the covers, we deploy S922s. The 922 was chosen specifically because it has such amazing price to performance ratio and covers a significant portion of the Power workloads. We can run all three operating systems on a 922. But there are some workloads, especially large IBM I applications, that the 922 can't handle. This is somewhat a licensing restriction from IBM on what they limit the 922 to run for IBM I, and not a hardware limitation. However, we're at work on a second offering, think of it as a second Power VM type, to address these larger workloads. But since this is still under development, that's about all I can say at this time. So from a network infrastructure, they're separate. So your software-defined networks on Azure are separate from your Azure VNets. So you'd attach your Power VMs and your x86 VMs running in Skytap to a Skytap SDN, your Azure VMs to an Azure VNet. But you can connect the VNet and the Skytap networks together through an Azure VPN gateway or through ExpressRoute. And given the proximity of the service of Skytap and the Azure services in the same region, the ping times on average over the VPN gateway are 4 to 5 milliseconds, which is fine for most applications. And then average ping times over ExpressRoute are about half that. And to connect to on-premises, you can use ExpressRoute, you could use Azure VPN Gateway, or you could connect a VPN directly between on-premises and Skytap. So let's do a demo. Okay, we're into our demo. I'm logged into the product, and I'm currently viewing my environments. So environments can be private to a particular user, or I can share them out with other users. Such would be the case with a production or a DR type environment. And as a reminder, environments are you can think of them as a virtual data center. So they're an encapsulation of compute, network, and storage. If I go into this environment, which isn't running, we'll take a quick tour of it. So I have 3 VMs. I have some x86 VMs, a Power VM. I have a number of networks defined in here. I have some networks that don't have things attached to them. I have other networks where I have VMs attached. And VMs can attach to multiple networks. So you can have multiple NICs on a VM to do whatever network partitioning you need to do, and you have full control over the subnet ranges. Now, some interesting things I can do with an environment is I can save it off as a template, which creates a read-only version of that environment. Customers will, in non-production scenarios, will integrate Skytap into their CI/CD pipeline, and after each good build, they'll create a template from that good build. And that way, testers have a known good place to go grab a test environment. They don't have to go through any configuration. They know it passed smoke tests. They can create their own copy of it and get up and running very quickly. The other thing interesting thing I can do with an environment is I can create a copy of it. I can create a clone of it. So we'll name it demo2 as copy, and we'll go copy. Now what this is doing under the covers is it's making an exact copy of all these VMs, all of the networks, all of the configurations. So if I have VM sequencing enabled on this because I want the VMs to come up in a certain order, all that metadata is copied along with it. This creates a new isolated environment, same 3 VMs, same networks. And because environments are isolated, anything I do in this copy doesn't impact the original one. So a very, very powerful capability within Skytap. So where do environments come from? I mentioned the notion of the concept of templates. If we go over and look at our templates, users can have their own templates. You can have company-wide templates that you share out, and we have some public templates as well. Let me scroll down here and find a complex one. So this template has 11 VMs. It has 7 networks. So again, a template encapsulates all the VMs, the data, the networks, et cetera. And creating a new one is as easy as saying new environment. If we take a look at our public templates, so these are ones that we make available. We have some IBM public templates. So here's one for 7.4. It only contains 1 VM and 1 network, but I can say new environment, and this will say OpenPOWER, if I can type, and say go. And what this is going to do is from that public template, it's going to create a new environment for me with this single IBM VM in it. So great way to get started very rapidly with the product is just using those public templates and then start migrating your LPARs into it. So let me go back out and we'll take a look at a running environment. So here's our OpenPOWER demo environment. This one has more VMs in it, so it has 11 VMs. Again, a mixture of x86 VMs and Power VMs. I mentioned VM sequencing, Power options. So if this was a dev or a test environment that you didn't want running 24 hours a day, you could set it up on a schedule so that it would shut down at a certain particular time each day. Now, accessing VMs is really straightforward. I could, if I had this VPN back into my on-premises, then I could certainly do an SSH session into it. I could put a public IP on it to access it over the public internet, where I could SSH into it, or we provide a secure connection, which is a browser-based access directly into the console. And so here I can log into this VM over this secure connection, and it's just like I'm sitting at the console. So very straightforward, very easy. If it's a Windows VM or a VM with a UI, you get a full GUI interface. For non-production scenarios, you might want to save credentials along with the VM. Now, you still have to have access to Skytap or access to that environment in order to access it, but this saves you from having to have an Excel spreadsheet somewhere with credentials saved off. And then we can log into there, and we have a full GUI interface that we're essentially at the console of the VM. If I jump over here, I have an IBM VM running. I'm already logged into it, so you get the beautiful green screen, and you can do stuff, any of your favorite IBM commands. So here we are on the system status, and I'm going to hit F5. If you look at the clock up here, it's going to refresh. So it's just like being at the console. And again, I could use a local client to connect to this if I had a VPN connection or put a public IP on it. If I flip over to another environment, so here I have an AIX and a Linux VM running. I think it's Ubuntu. And these are connected. So these are connected to a single network, and this single network has a VPN connection over to Azure. So I'll flip over here to my Azure account, and in my resource group, I have my VPN gateway defined. I have a VM, Azure VM running on here. Its IP address is 10.5.0.5. And if I come back over to my environment, I can go ahead and get to the console of this VM. and I'm already logged in, and I can ping 10.5.0.5. So we can ping that, and if I switch over to my Ubuntu VM, let's get logged back in. And I can ping 10.5.0.5. Pretty cool. And I can do, I think I have a trace route in here. So there's a trace route to my AIX VM. You know, it jumps right there. And here's the trace route out to that Azure VM. So you can see that it's going through our gateway, it's traversing over the VPN gateway, and then it's hitting the Azure VM. So that's how I would bridge that. Again, I could use Azure VPN gateway, or I could use ExpressRoute to connect my Skytap network out to my Azure VNet. Now, there's a whole nother host of features that we don't have time to go over. As administrators, you can create sandboxes for users and groups of users and limit the resources that they have available to them. There's a fairly robust auditing system, so you can track what users are doing, who did what and when. Another interesting thing is for production environments, you can lock the environment, and so this will prevent anybody from making inadvertent changes to the environment. So let's pause there and jump back over to the presentation. All right, so in terms of availability, we're currently available in Azure's East US region out of Virginia. We're in the process of expanding to Azure regions in South Central US out of Texas, West Europe, which is in Amsterdam, and Southeast Asia, which is hosted out of Singapore. These are currently underway, and I expect them to come online before the end of the year. And we're in discussions with the Azure team on the next set of regions, but nothing to announce today. We are available in the Azure Marketplace. If you log in with your Azure credentials, search the Marketplace for Skytap, and you can provision a service and start running your first Power workload in under 10 minutes. Default pricing is pay as you go. So you're going to pay by the hour. We monitor down to the second, but think of it as paying by the hour. For compute, it's gigabyte RAM hour. So if you have a 2 gig LPAR you run for 1 hour, that'd be 2 gigabyte RAM hours worth of compute. AIX licensing is included in the cost of compute. IBM OS licensing has a separate charge that we make available through the service, and then Linux is BYOL. Storage is calculated by the gigabyte hour. Now, storage, you pay for what you consume. Compute, you're only paying for compute when you're running it. So if you shut it down, then you're only paying for the storage behind that. In the next few weeks, we'll be releasing support for reserved capacity. This is where you make a yearly commitment to a certain amount of capacity, and for that commitment, you get a lower price, but it's a use it or lose it type of commitment. You can think of this as a bit like reserved instances, but a little more flexibility. To learn more, you can find us on the Azure Marketplace and find pricing and packaging there. You can visit us at www.skytap.com, our corporate website. And if you add /contact-us to the end of that URL, you can fill out a form and somebody from our team will contact you. Here's my contact information. So that's our content for today. And honestly, we just scratched the surface of our offering on Azure. I'm very proud of what our team has delivered, and we have more coming this year and beyond. Again, if you'd like to learn more, visit our website at www.skytap.com, or feel free to contact me directly at djones@skytap.com. Thank you. All right. Hey, thanks everyone for tuning in. I'm here live now. I recorded it. I was having internet connectivity issues this weekend. So I recorded it, didn't want any blips during it. If you have any questions, let's see, I have one on the chat. Was wondering, saw a particular talk earlier. Cool, I'll have to follow up on that. So that's X2Go. So I'll take a look at X2Go and got the contact information. Let me make a copy of that out. If there's any other questions, you can use the raise your hand feature and then we can get you unmuted. Otherwise, do feel free to contact me at djones@skytap.com or visit our website or provision a service on Azure. It's a very low cost model just to go out there and kick the tires and see what it can do for you. All right, everybody's either shy or they're multitasking and they didn't realize the recording's done. All right, well, if there are no questions that you feel safe asking now, I guess we can go ahead and end the session. If anything that comes up later, again, feel free to email me or visit us at www.skytap.com.